Happy Father's Day, everyone. Yeah, that's today if you forgot. When I was thinking back, I think I was about 11 years old when my mom got remarried. And at that age, we then moved into my stepdad's house. Okay, anyone ever just go over to a friend's house for a sleepover? And you remember how weird that was? Because you're like, all right, so what time am I supposed to get up in the morning? Where are the cups if I want to drink in the middle of the night? There's all these things that when you just stay at somebody's house just for even one evening that you have to figure out, right? Well, some of us also know that when your parent gets remarried, you get to do that except every day for a long time, right? Because when you move into somebody's house, there's some things that they do that are different than the way you do it, and sometimes it's a little weird, right? One of those things that I remember vividly as we moved into my stepdad's house was the way that we handled the milk in the fridge versus the way that they handled the milk in the fridge. You're like, that's a difference? Really? Yeah, watch. See, here's the thing. There was a time when myself, my mom, my dad, before they were divorced, we lived on a dairy farm with my uncle. And we grew up on this dairy farm. And when you live on a dairy farm, you have fresh milk. Fresh milk is the best milk. But here's what fresh milk does in the fridge. It separates. Fresh milk separates in the fridge. So before you pour yourself a glass of milk, or before you pour that milk on your cereal or whatever you're doing, you take the milk out of the fridge and you give it a shake. Yeah? So even though we don't live on a dairy farm anymore, it's just a habit. When I go to the fridge, when my mom goes to the fridge, even when my little brother goes to the fridge, we open it, we get the milk out, we give it a shake, we pour it on whatever we're doing. Vividly remember this. One morning, my mom got up. She went to the fridge, and I think she was pouring cereal. She poured the cereal in first because that's the logical way to do it. If you pour milk in first, we can have a talk later. But you pour the cereal in first, and then she went to the fridge. She grabbed the carton of milk. She gave it a little shake, and milk exploded everywhere. Because my stepdad has 2 teenage sons at the time. And they find it easiest to just leave the top off the milk. Sometimes they would just go to the fridge and grab the milk and take a couple swigs and put it back. So it's just convenient just to leave the top off the milk. For us, that don't make no sense because you shake the milk. Another thing that was interesting to me as I moved into their house is my stepdad and my oldest stepbrother, his name's Mitch, they would wrestle. And when I say wrestle, I mean wrestle. One of them, it was always in good fun, but one of them would get a little smirk on their face as the other one walked in the room. And then they would walk up to each other and they would just lock in. And they'd start pushing back and forth and all over the place, and you knew you better get out of the way because they were all over the place. And as they wrestled, things got broke. We went through coffee tables, plural, because they would just be wrestling and they'd run into the table and the leg would just break. My stepdad's favorite recliner, always in a state of disrepair, because that was the prime spot for Mitch to jump on top of him and try to get the advantage. Here's the thing that I remembered, though, about these wrestling matches that I always thought was interesting. It was always interesting to me that my stepdad never went easy on Mitch. He was about 16 at the time, right? And he wrestled in high school, so he knew what he was doing. But my stepdad's a big guy. He wasn't going to overpower him. So my stepdad always won. And I was like, man, he's your kid, right? Don't you let them win sometimes? He didn't. And then I remembered as Mitch started getting bigger and started to get to the age where he was going to graduate high school, he started almost winning. And then I remember Mitch won a couple matches. And then I remember they didn't wrestle anymore. And I thought that was weird. I was like, wasn't that fun for you guys? Why are you just done? I was in high school when I realized that I think I figured it out. We were actually reading a short story in one of my English classes, and I looked for this story. I couldn't find it. My youngest brother, who's graduating this year, actually, yeah, there's a lot of ages. My youngest brother, who's graduating this year, I asked him to go ask my high school English teacher. He forgot. So there was this short story, and in it, it was all about that interaction between my stepbrother and my stepdad. It was a story of a kid who wrestled his dad. His dad actually started wrestling him even when he was really little, right? And the kid never won. And the kid in the story longed to win, right? He was like, one day I'll get him. One day I'll pin my dad. It'll be like sweet victory the day that I pin my dad. And then in the story, he pinned his dad, and he cried. Because he realized that in defeating his dad, in getting the upper hand, he was now the man. He was now the one who was called to become the protector, the one who was wisdom. That's what we have to do with our kids, right? Our kids can't stay kids forever. We're called as fathers and as parents to protect our children, to have the answers for our children. But if our children are 40 and still looking to us to protect them and to have all the answers, then we probably haven't done a great job. Right? There comes a time, there comes a day when our kids need to be adults. They need to be trained up in the way that they should go. Proverbs 22:6 says that, right? It says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. We must raise our children in the correct way, in pursuit of Jesus, and this will set them up for success. Now, I do want to say that if you have children who you've raised the right way, but they didn't go the right way, right? That's not your fault, right? You did your work. You did what you were called to do. Proverbs aren't promises, but they're really good ideas, right? Proverbs aren't promises. So this proverb says, train up a child in the way she should go, and then he will not depart from it. It's a good chance if you train up your child in Scripture that he'll go the right way. But there's also a chance that they won't. So don't feel like you're a failure. Just always give that little caveat with that verse. You did the right thing. Because even if your child did go astray, I'm pretty confident that there's constantly this thing inside of them that says, you know what you're doing is wrong. Right? Here's the thing. Sometimes I think we think of Jesus as 30-year-old Messiah even when he was a child. Right? Do we ever do that? Sometimes I'm like, man, I wish there was more about Jesus' childhood so that I could sort of identify with it a little bit. Today we're going to look at Luke chapter 2, verses 39 through 52. This is one of, I say this all the time, right? But this is one of my favorite passages of Scripture because this is the only time when we get a glimpse of Jesus as an adolescent. Luke's the only gospel writer who gives us this picture. And it's funny because, spoiler alert, Jesus' parents lose him. We'll get there. I'm going to read this, and then we'll go back through it and just see what the Lord has for us this morning. So Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 39, says this. And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And the child, that's Jesus, grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Now, his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. But supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. And he said to them, Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house? And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Jesus gets lost. What? So, this is a story I've read a lot because, again, it's one of my favorite passages. But I realized that there's a few things in here that teach us about what we should expect as our children grow. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking for in a minute. But first, we're going to read a bunch of this for the context, because the context is super important here. So starting back in verse 39, says this. It says, And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. Now remember that we're supposed to train up our children in the way they should go, right? Right. We just read that. Train up a child in the way you should go. Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph, that's what they did. That's what verse 39 is saying, right? When they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord. Jesus' life started out correct as a Jewish child. His parents made sure that the law was complete, that the law was followed before they returned home to Nazareth. Verse 40, And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Jesus grows up. Jesus grows up in size, right? He matures as a boy. Remember, Jesus wasn't a 30-year-old man after he was born. He matures as a boy, as a child, because his parents fed him the right things and did a good job. He also matures in wisdom. He also matures in wisdom because his parents did a good job at teaching him the law, the prophets, and I'm also going to say they probably told him about what the angel had told them. Right? Jesus had to know who he was. Yes, he's God. He was still a boy. He was still taught. His parents raised him well. Jesus was raised with purpose and on purpose by his parents so that he would grow up in the way that he should go. And I think that this is the point of Luke writing this piece of history for us. Right? Luke wasn't writing this so that we got to laugh at Mary and Joseph for losing Jesus. But Luke's point here is that Jesus is growing up. And I know that because at the end of this passage, it's like bookended with this verse and then verse 52. Verse 52 says this, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." That's at the beginning of this passage and then at the end of this passage. Which tells me the point of Luke saying this is Jesus is growing up. Jesus is growing up. He wasn't a baby and then a man. He was a baby and he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor. Our children will do the same thing, right? Sometimes we want our children to just stay children because they're super cute. Sometimes we look back and we're like, oh, remember when they were actually cute? They just listened. Remember when we didn't have to deal with all this drama? Our children are going to grow up because that's what they're supposed to do, right? If we feed them well, if we teach them well, they will mature and they will grow up. Verse 41 and 42. They say, "Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year." I'm just going to stop there real quick. These parents are like, I mean this in the nicest way, they're like super Jewish people because they didn't have to do that. The law said that they needed to make this trip, this pilgrimage for the Jewish Passover once a lifetime. They do it every year. You're like, well, did they live next door? No, they lived 85 miles away. It was a few-day walk. And they did it every single year. When it says, according to the custom, in verse 42, I'll keep reading, at the feast of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. This was their custom, right? This was their family trip. It's what they did every year. They only had to do it once in a lifetime. They did it every year. The other thing here for context is that it says Jesus is how old? 12 years old. Here's the cool thing about this culture. 12 years old is when you would start to learn the family business. Some of you are like, oh, I see where you're going. It's when you start to learn the family business. Now, Joseph was a carpenter, right? I'll leave it at that until we get there, because I don't want to get ahead of myself, because I will. Verse 43. When the feast had ended, this was a week-long thing, ended with Passover. When the feast had ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it. Like, why did he stay behind? I don't know. His parents didn't even know. But supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. So after they've went a day without seeing Jesus, Mary looked at Joseph, or Joseph looked at Mary and was like, hey, have you seen Jesus? You know, the Messiah? We should probably be protecting him. Where'd he go? I don't know. There's a lot of people here. There's a lot of family here. He's probably with one of them. So they start searching, right? They start going all around. Nope, haven't seen him. Nope, haven't seen him. Well, the last time I saw him was right before we left. Oh, okay. The other interesting thing that one commentary said, and I'm not sure if I fully grasp this, but they said that the reason that the whole family and everyone traveling with them stopped was probably because it was nighttime. right? They probably went and walked for a day, and now it's nighttime, and they're settling down for dinner and for camping over because they don't want to travel at night. There's like robbers and stuff. So not only did Mary and Joseph start searching for where Jesus was in the group at night, but now they can't find him. So the commentary said that they then waited overnight before they returned home. Sorry, if Kellen's missing for a day, I'm not waiting overnight. Maybe they did. I don't know. Commentators are more smart than I am. But just saying, I don't know if I'm waiting overnight. Nonetheless, they return to Jerusalem to search for him. Verse 46. After 3 days, they found him in the temple. 3 days? Wow. That's a long time. That's a long time of searching. They found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Remember that in this culture, at 12 years old, you start to learn your father's business, right? Remember that Jesus is taught well. He's taught prophecy, literally about himself. He's also taught the promises that the angels told Mary and Joseph. So Jesus knows, I'm 12 years old. I'm supposed to be a rabbi. I'm supposed to be a teacher. So where do they find him? They find him in the temple, learning the family business, learning from these rabbis. The cool thing is, and this comes up in just a second, the way that rabbis taught was they asked questions, but they didn't want an answer in return. They wanted another question back. That just sounds frustrating. Sounds frustrating to be asked a question and be expected to ask a question just to get another question. Whew. But that's how they did it. They asked questions, and then they received questions back. But here's the thing. Here's our first point. The first point is this. As our children grow, they need mentors. They need other people to come into their life and teach them, to coach them. Right? They need mentors. We as fathers and as parents have to encourage that, which is easier said than done, right? Like sometimes Kellen wants to hang out with other male figures, and I'm like, no, bro, hang out with me. Like, I'll show you how to play guitar. You don't need lessons. It's fine. I'm the dad. I need to do this. Or like, send your child to practice, and the coach shows them how to throw the ball, and then they come home, and they're like, Dad, let's play catch. I can throw the ball so hard now. The coach showed me how. And you're like, all right, sure. And then they throw the ball the first time, and you're like, oh, wow, you can. Sorry, your coach doesn't know what I'm talking about. Let me show you how to really do it. Right? We want to teach our kids. We want to show them how to do it. But they need mentors that are not always just us. Right? We need to encourage them to have these mentors. That's where Jesus' parents find him. They find him with other rabbis, with other teachers, learning how to do just that, what he's called to. So the first point is, as their children grow, they need mentors. Verse 48 says this, and when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" I find it funny, especially in the context of where Jesus has been for the last 3 days, that Mary asks Jesus a question, and Jesus answers with a question. It's like, why didn't you look for me here first? Didn't you know this is where I would be? Well, no, Jesus, you're 12. I thought maybe you found a new friend and wanted to hang out with them. I don't think they expected Jesus to be around the scholars, right? Even though they had been teaching him well, even though they knew that Jesus knows his calling, his purpose. They didn't necessarily expect 12-year-old Jesus to be hanging out with the old rabbis in the temple. And this is because as their children grow, they will change. As their children grow, they will change. Sometimes the change is going to be unexpected. It's going to be out of the blue, and it's going to be all of the sudden. The other day, I was sitting in the car wash with Kellen in the back seat. And Kellen goes, "Daddy, E-X-I-T. Exit." And I was like, "Good job, buddy. Who taught you how to spell exit?" Because that was my logical explanation, is that somebody taught him how to do that. And he goes, "No, on the sign. E-X-I-T. Exit." And I was like, "Buddy, you're reading. You're 4. Who taught you how to read?" It surprised me that Kellen could read something without being prompted or without us ever really showing him how to read yet. Right? We read him books a lot. But do we have him sound out words or do letters and stuff? Not really. He just knows. Growth leads to change, right? Our children are going to change into adults. They're going to grow. And we can't be afraid of our children's growth. Sometimes, back to Kellen, he scares me a little bit with his growth. Because sometimes he's a little bossy. Sometimes he says, "Daddy, I want to sing, but only if there's people here to listen to me." I'm like, "Oh, bossy and prideful, great." But I can encourage him in his calling, right? If you ask Kellen what he wants to be a worship leader. Sorry, David, but sometimes worship leaders are a little bossy, right? We love David. We can encourage our children into their calling even when it's a little scary. Even when they're surpassing us and we're like, "Hey, could you slow down? I want you to be a kid a little longer." Right? As our children grow, they will change. We have to lean on our understanding of who God is and what he has for their life. Verse 50. It says, "And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And when he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them, and his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." So even though this little episode happened with Jesus and Mary and Joseph, Jesus went home with them, right? He was submissive to them as his parents. Jesus, being 12 years old, probably then learned Joseph's trade, right? I also believe that because they did this every year, because they made this trip every year, Every year they probably were like, all right, is Jesus here? Right? It's like Home Alone. How did the second one happen? Like, all right, is Jesus with us? Come on, I know you want to talk to the rabbis, but let's go, right? But here's the cool thing that Mary shows us. As their children grow, we must take note. We must take note of their growth. We can treasure those things up, treasure those memories up in our hearts, for ourselves for sure, but also for them. I remember there was a time, it's a time when I was talking to my mom. I was a cretin as a child. I wasn't the best child. It's just true. And when I was in 8th grade, I had the idea, I thought, to go move and live with my grandparents and go to a different high school. I was going to go live with them. It was going to be a good time. All my idea. Later on in life, when I was in college, I found out that one of my best friends from middle school was in prison for murder. And I was like, whoa. It's like, Mom, it's a good thing that I had the idea to move away. Like, I probably still would have been hanging out with him. And she was like, yeah, your idea to move away. I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, no, that was my idea. She's like, somehow I planted that in you, but I did it for your growth. I did it because I knew that if you stayed here, it wouldn't be good for you and your growth. My mom got to speak into my life that day that I had actually come a long way, right? Because I was in a place where I thought that I was pretty, like, stagnant. And she's like, no, think about how far you've come, right? So as our children grow, we must take note of their progress so that we can speak into their life as they get older. I'm going to bring the worship team up. There's 3 things for this part of the message. And that's that as our children grow, they need mentorship or mentors. They will change. They're going to surpass us. And we must take note. These things take place as we raise our children with purpose in Jesus and on purpose. Praying for their salvation, training them up in the way that they should go, and being the best example we can be of Christ to them. There's one more thing that this passage showed me this week as I was studying. I realized that we are adopted into the family of God as well. Right? God is our perfect Father. That's how we open the service. God is our perfect Father. We're sons and daughters of Him. We are His children by grace and through faith of the work that Jesus did. And then sometimes we slip and we lose sight of Jesus, much like Jesus' parents did. And much like Jesus' parents searched in all the wrong places, we do the same thing, right? When we take our eyes off Jesus, when we lose sight of Him, and we start to recognize that we're hungry for God, a lot of times we go to all the wrong places first, right? We go to relationships with others. We go to whatever your crutch is. I'm not going to do a whole list. But we look for fulfillment in God in all the wrong places. So when life gets crazy and we forget our identity as sons and daughters of God, we lose sight of Him. We have to go back to where we found Him in the first place. Right? Jesus' parents left the temple to go home. And then they didn't look there first. We have to go back to where we found Jesus in the first place. The world will never fulfill the hunger that forms when we stop pursuing God. We must turn around and go back to God, keeping our eyes on Him. And the cool thing is, like the prodigal son, when we do that, we'll find Him actually pursuing us, because He is our perfect Father. Dear Lord, I thank you for your word. I thank you that you speak to us through it. Lord, I pray that as we celebrate Father's Day, that we would recognize your place as our perfect Father. I do thank you for all the fathers here. I pray that you bless them. I pray that you show them how to lean into you more and more for strength as they raise their children. I thank you that you're our example of who we are to be in you.